Steam locomotive safety is no joke, and the true dangers exist on tourist and steam program operations. Case in point, the Gettysburg Railroad was one of the most notoriously shambled examples of leadership and safety. Having a crew member's son scorched to the 5th and 6th degree burns all over him was one of the worst examples of leadership. And the reason was very simple. The crown sheet was exposed to the flames, and a staple design from the Kingston, Ontario's locomotive works saved the crew members' lives and the locomotive itself. CBS's Barry Peterson reports on how tourist lines from the 90s are making a permanent comeback with safer training, technology, and the memo.
Under the supervision of the FRA, railroad operations have dwindled to the point of no return. Operating through the most crucial Civil War fields of Biglerville lies the Gettysburg Railroad. Its history, and like its railroad, were some of the most horrific. In a 1995 interview with Ron Allen from 48 Hours, James Cornell, the son of Sloan Cornell, experienced what appeared to be 5th and 6th degree burns. How did it happen? Under the lack of consistent practices, the crown sheet portion of the firebox was exposed to the heat. The water level went below, and the crown sheet collapsed in a horrific manner. The flames and coal smoke scorched and scalded the crewmen so horrifically, the railroad was permanently shut down of the steam program. There were patterns of negligence and inconsistent practices, including recycling old boiler water, a huge violation to the FRA. Also red flags were lack of lubrication of the air compressor, running gear, and journals. But the largest of red flags came with the no blowing down of the boiler, spindles, and gauge cocks during every day of operation. When the NTSB confirmed their suspicions, Gettysburg was shut down for good. The spindles were clogged with 90 to 100% scale and sediment from lack of cleaning. The feed water heating system was unlawfully shut off, and a flanged check valve spitted water back into the cab, which was one of the first of many red flags for the railroad to endure. But tourist railroads no longer have those practices due to their risky behavior patterns, and if Sloan at the time trained his son consistently on locomotive maintenance, the crown sheet failure of 1995 at Gardner's, Pennsylvania would not have happened had it been for their choppy practices. And hopefully, this would be a learning lesson to all rail fans is that steam locomotives are machines and not toys. Barry Peterson, CBS News on the Gettysburg Railroad line in Biglerville, Pennsylvania. Human error isn't only limited to tourist operations. In 1987, CSX had one of the worst human error cases of all time. Not only were the crews in hot water with their superiorities and supervisors, but also the dispatchers were laid off after miscommunications were confirmed of picking up the wrong orders at the wrong station. 4 of the crew members were killed and 2 others critically injured in this fatal head-on collision. In Conklin, New York, that nightmare occurred. The engineers had picked up the wrong orders from the dispatcher. Unfortunately, his cataclysmic mistake turned out to be fatal. Heading across at 45 miles per hour, the crew had no idea that another freight train was heading towards them at 67 miles per hour. The crews hit the emergency brakes, but they were too late. The GP40-2s were demolished, and a GP40 was also sheared of its car body, separated from its frame. What was the most tragic, 2 rebuilt SD26s from older SD24 rebuilds were mangled in the twisted mess of steel, metal, and iron. The leased unit had its frame snapped like a toothpick, and the cab would be later used to rebuild an older GP35 from the Western Maryland. The rest of the body was scrapped later on. Total 5 of the 6 units were cut up and melted down. A tragic lesson to have better radio transponders and better signal connections on not only the tourist operations, but also the classes of railroads, including their fallen flags. To prevent a similar copycat collision like this again, CSX and all of its Class 1 railroads had permanently obtained positive train control, which would alert engineers to pick up the right orders at the correct station at the right time. Frank Courier, CBS News, Conklin, New York. As train wrecks continue to impact the railroads, more wrecks are personal than they appear. This wreck in Lakeland, Florida in February of 1994 permanently changed mixed trains and the axles they rode on. Similar flaws to the Intercity Express 884 from June of 1998, when the tires the wheels rode on cracked open, and when they hit the switchbacks, they uncoupled and violently derailed at 175 miles per hour. 100 plus people were killed and over 120 injured. The same circumstances in this wreck where the stamped-on axle proved to be a costly mistake from the operations. The friction was so heavy that the smoke began to pour out of the axles as they began to hit a curve at over 55 miles per hour. The train began to swerve violently until the axles popped off the rails and telescoped into one another. Most tragically was the helicopter pilot's engine had stalled out and began plummeting to earth. He survived with critical injuries and is expected to make a full recovery. But not as the same for the injured circus performers and crew. One of the performers was killed upon impact, and another one was pronounced dead on arrival. The NTSB made permanent recommendations and requirements that mixed trains would have freight train journals, axle journals, because they would handle curvatures in the tracks better than the passenger predecessors. And immediately they did. Because of those changes, no more reported circus train wrecks were confirmed. And the people can now pick up the pieces and rebuild their right-of-ways with all railroads abroad. Richard Schlesinger, CBS News, Lakeland, Florida. Our story to close is a history of wrecks along the Midwest. The states of Indiana and Illinois are looking forward to curb collisions at interlocking towers, and the attitude to stop them is incredible. But why are millions and millions of dollars being used for a nonprofit that was used 50 years ago to this day? CBS's Vince Gonzalez closes out on how collisions impact the future of all railroads for tonight's special assignment.
Train wrecks such as this high-hooded U-23B in Bibb Mill, Alabama, and these collisions in Knox, Indiana from September of 91 and Freeport, Illinois in 1989 have illustrated the haunting dangers when collisions crash head-on to fatal dangers. The wreck at Knox, Indiana lost two SD-60s, a GP-59, a C-39-8, and a C-39-8E. Cause of the wreck was the westbound engineer's fatigue after crashing at the controls of his locomotive. The eastbound counterpart had suffered a medical episode. The collision at Freeburg, Illinois wrecked an SD-28, a non-turbocharged variety of an SD-35, an SD-40-2, a GP-38, and GP-11. All were melted down after they were turned to charred soot. And similar wrecks, such as Seligman, Arizona, which lost 2 units, including a B-40-8 wide cab, illustrated the fatal dangers to train travel. And 50 years ago to this day, Operation Lifesaver wanted to curb not only crossing invasions, but also collisions, derailments at wrecks at all railroad property. Railroads like ATSF, Illinois Central Gulf, and Norfolk Southern also played a heavy part in upgrading their safety practices. And when it comes to operations with consistent training, there is no laughing matter when it comes to collisions. The results are fatally clear. Interlocking towers such as the ones at Freeburg, Illinois, and Knox, Indiana, Bibb Mill, Alabama, and Seligman, Arizona also emphasize the fatal nature of those dangers, and why trespassers are permanently off limits with no consent from the lessees of the railroad and also their fallen flags. In the end, change would be being made to upgrade the safety factors and security so they don't suffer jeopardizing injuries that are more freakish than a 6th-degree burn. On special assignment in Calumet City, Illinois, I'm Vince Gonzalez.
And that's part of our world for tonight. Tonight will be a back-to-back episodes of 60 Minutes and 60 Minutes 2. They are at 9, 8 Central and 10, 9 Central Time. For the CBS Evening News, at the former Conrail Interlocking Tower in Bryan, Ohio, Dan Rather reporting with courage. See you later on 60 Minutes and 60 Minutes 2.
For news 24 hours a day, CBS.com on the internet and on our interactive partner, America Online, at keyword CBS News.